It began with a flicker of fluorescent light and the sharp scent of antiseptic. Julian Wakefield opened his eyes to a ceiling that didn't belong to his penthouse or his office. His head throbbed, and the sterile coldness of the sheets beneath him told him more than the dull ache in his ribs. He wasn't in control. Machines beeped steadily around him, tethering his heart to some unseen assurance that he was, in fact, still alive. Then he turned his head and saw her. Amelia Hart stood at his bedside, dressed in navy scrubs, her chestnut hair pulled back in a soft knot. She was charting something with deliberate precision, her brows furrowed just enough for him to remember the way they used to lift when she laughed. Time hadn't dulled her beauty, it had sharpened it into something quieter, more resilient. She didn't notice him at first, it gave him time to remember. The merger, the argument, the dizzying rush of lights and the sudden slam of metal and glass. A car accident, maybe. He reached toward the pain in his side, wincing, and that tiny movement caught her eye. She froze. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither the years nor the silence could erase. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered in that way they always did when she was holding something back. "You're in the ER at St. Luke's. You were in a crash. Do you remember anything?" He nodded, then shook his head. His mouth felt like sandpaper. "I remember the sound, the impact." He looked at her, truly looked. "I didn't expect you." "No," she replied, brushing a loose strand behind her ear. "I didn't expect you either." Amelia checked his IV, her fingers brushing his wrist with unintentional softness. He noticed how her hands had changed. There was a thin scar along the inside of her thumb. Her touch was confident now, unhesitating. "How long have I been here?" he asked. 4 hours. You lost consciousness when the paramedics got to you. Mild concussion, bruised ribs, a few stitches on your temple. And you're my nurse." She gave a small smile, polite and professional. "I'm on shift, trauma rotation, it's just coincidence." Julian tried to sit up and gritted his teeth when pain shot through his ribs. "Don't," she said, and this time her voice had the gentle firmness he remembered from when she used to lay beside him, reminding him to rest, to breathe, to stop carrying the weight of the world on his back. "Lie back, you're not going anywhere." "I wasn't planning to." That earned him a flicker of something, amusement, or maybe disbelief. Then she was all business again, charting, checking vitals, asking clinical questions. He answered with the obedience of a man who suddenly didn't mind being at someone else's mercy. It wasn't lost on him how strange it was that the woman he once loved, no, still loved, though he'd never said it out loud, was standing here, steady and close, while he was broken and stripped of everything that made him powerful. They had ended quietly, too quietly. No slammed doors or betrayal, just a slow unraveling of time and distance, of unspoken need and unshared grief. She had wanted something he hadn't known how to give. He had been too busy chasing boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. And now, with nothing but pain and silence between them, she was the first person he saw when the world turned itself inside out. "Amelia," he said softly, not sure what he meant to follow with. But she just looked at him like she was afraid of remembering. "I need to finish rounds," she said, her voice brittle. "I'll send someone in to monitor your vitals." He wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to ask how she'd been, where she went after him, what scars she had carried in his absence. But his body ached and the air between them felt thin. She turned before he could speak again. "Wait," he said, the word raw in his throat. Amelia stopped at the curtain. "Why didn't you tell me you were here?" he asked. She hesitated, hand curled at her side. Then, without turning, she said, "You let me go, Julian. I figured you wouldn't want to know." And then she was gone. He stared at the pale ceiling, listening to the steady beat of his heart, wondering when he'd started feeling like he'd lost something essential. It wasn't the company or the power. It was the absence of a voice that once made even his worst days feel survivable. And now, here she was again, just beyond reach, still holding his pulse in the palm of her hand. Pain roared beneath his ribs, but it wasn't just from the crash. It was the sudden clarity of regret. Julian barely slept. Hospitals had a way of making time stretch and loop in strange ways. Nurses moved like constellations around him, wheeling carts and murmuring to one another in low tones, their footsteps soft against tile floors. But none of them were her. Amelia hadn't returned. He caught glimpses of her. Once in the early morning, her silhouette at the nurse's station, framed in the muted glow of a desk lamp. Another time through the narrow window in his door, her voice muffled as she gave report to another nurse. She never looked in. He didn't ask for her, not because he didn't want to, but because pride was a hard thing to let die, even when you're wrapped in a hospital gown and dependent on painkillers. And maybe, if he was honest, he was afraid of what she might say, afraid that the warmth he thought he saw in her eyes was just a flicker of old habit. On the second day, a nurse named Darren came in to change his bandages. "She's good, you know," Darren said, tightening the gauze around Julian's ribs with skilled hands. Who? Julian asked, already knowing. Amelia. People feel safe around her, even when they're dying. Julian closed his eyes. "She always had that way," he said quietly. Darren paused, then added, "She doesn't talk much about her past, but she never talks about you." That struck deeper than he expected. By day 3, he could walk slowly down the corridor with assistance. Darren helped him to the window at the end of the hall. Julian stood there, watching the early spring rain streak down the glass. The world outside moved on, unbothered by the cracks in his bones or the ache that refused to settle. He didn't see her again until dusk. He was making his way back to the room when her voice came from behind him, low and laced with concern. "You shouldn't be walking alone." Julian turned. Amelia stood with her arms folded loosely, a badge clipped to her pocket and shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence felt like a balm. "I needed air," he said. "You could have called someone." "I didn't want someone, I wanted," he stopped, swallowing the rest. She tilted her head, waiting. He shifted against the wall, trying not to wince. "I wanted something to remind me I'm still human." That surprised her. He could see it in the way her shoulders softened, the way her eyes flicked down to his bruised hands. "You are," she said gently, "in more ways than you think." There was a pause then, a long one full of things neither of them were ready to say. She stepped closer, not quite reaching him, but close enough that he could feel the heat of her presence. "I've been meaning to ask," she said quietly. "What happened? The crash? Was it just bad luck?" He looked at her, really looked. This wasn't curiosity, it was concern, maybe even something more. "I was driving home, late, pushing through another overnight meeting. Couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something real, or slept. I saw the red light too late, the other car, hit me on the driver's side. Lucky it wasn't worse." "You could have died." "I know. And still working yourself until you collapse. Nothing's changed." He felt the sting in her words, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. And because she'd said them with the ache of someone who once believed he could be better. "I didn't know how to stop," he said, "until everything stopped for me." Amelia watched him for a moment, then reached out, gently guiding him by the arm. "Come on, you should sit." They walked slowly, side by side, back to his room. Inside, the light was dim, the edges of the world softened by twilight. She helped him into the chair near the window instead of the bed, adjusting the pillows behind his back without asking. When she was done, she stood there, as if debating whether to stay or leave. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice low. "Regret what?" "Walking away from us." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I regret what we didn't say," she murmured. "I regret the silence more than the ending." Julian studied her, the way she held herself like armor, the flicker in her eyes that betrayed a memory surfacing. "I used to think you left because you stopped loving me." She turned then, and something broke in her expression. "I left because I couldn't watch you destroy yourself for things that never loved you back." The words hung between them, not harsh, just painfully honest. "And because I was scared," she added, "that if I stayed I'd become invisible, and you wouldn't notice until it was too late." Julian exhaled slowly, the truth of it like a stone in his chest. "You were never invisible," he said. "You were the only thing that made sense." She shook her head, half smiling in that sad way people do when something's been too broken too long. "You said that once," she replied, "after your father died, but then the world came calling and I watched you answer it every time. I just couldn't keep waiting." "I know." He leaned forward slightly, wincing as he did, but needing to look her in the eye. "But you're here now." "I'm your nurse," she said, though her voice faltered on the last word. "No, you could have asked to be reassigned, but you stayed." Amelia looked down at her hands, then back at him. There was something trembling in her throat, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. "I stayed because I needed to see if you were okay," she said. "That's all." Julian nodded. He didn't press, but the silence between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a bridge, fragile, possible. When she turned to leave, she paused at the door. You should rest, tomorrow they'll probably start you on PT. He offered a faint smile, will you be here? I don't know, she said, but there was something softer in her eyes now. Maybe. And then she was gone again, but this time the room didn't feel quite as cold. Julian leaned back, heart aching in a way he couldn't blame on his injuries. She was right, he had chosen 1,000 things over her, always believing she'd be there when he was done. But now she had her own life, her own strength. And if he wanted even a sliver of her back, he'd have to show her something he'd never shown anyone. That he could change. That maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to become the kind of man who stayed. By the 5th day, Julian could walk the length of the hall without assistance. His stitches had begun to heal, the swelling on his temple fading into a pale, yellowing bruise. The pain in his ribs lingered but dulled now, like a warning whispered rather than shouted. He moved slower, more carefully, not just because of his injuries, but because every step seemed to echo with questions he hadn't dared ask until now. He hadn't seen Amelia since that evening by the window. She hadn't been on shift, or perhaps she had and made sure not to come near. It was hard to tell. Nurses moved in and out like tides, some warm, some brisk, but none with her quiet steadiness. He should have expected it. She had always known when to protect her heart. Still, each time the door creaked open, he found himself hoping it was her. It wasn't until late one afternoon, when the sky outside hung heavy with clouds and the room had dimmed into an almost stillness, that he saw her again. She stepped inside without knocking, a clipboard in hand, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed her uncertainty. He set the book he hadn't really been reading aside. You came. I'm not on shift, she said quickly, almost defensively, but I heard you might be discharged tomorrow, thought I'd check in. Julian's breath caught for a moment. The thought of leaving felt strange, not because he was attached to the hospital, but because he hadn't yet found the words he needed to say. You've been avoiding me, he said, not accusingly, but as fact. Amelia lowered the clipboard to her side, eyes meeting his with reluctant honesty. Yes, because it hurts to be around me. Because I don't know what it means, she said. You being here, us talking again, you saying the things I always wanted to hear years ago. He nodded slowly. Everything feels different now, he admitted. She leaned against the wall, the light casting soft shadows along her face. You say that like it's simple. I don't think it is, he said, but it's real. Amelia crossed her arms, not coldly, just grounding herself. You haven't asked about me, she said. Julian blinked. I didn't know if I had the rights. Her smile was faint. You didn't, but I'll tell you anyway. He waited. I left New York for a while after we ended, she said. Took travel assignments, Oregon, Minnesota, a brief stint in Nairobi. It felt good to disappear into other people's emergencies. I kept thinking if I could save everyone else, maybe I wouldn't have to look at what I couldn't fix between us. He didn't interrupt. Eventually I came back, my mom got sick and I needed to be here. After she passed, I stayed, started rebuilding, got a dog, bought a little house with a leaky roof and a stubborn front door. I found a rhythm, one that didn't include you. He swallowed hard. Do you miss it, us? She looked at him for a long time. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, when something beautiful happens and there's no one to share it with. Julian looked down at his hands, the bandages almost gone now, skin raw but healing. I've missed you every day, he said, even when I didn't know how to say it, even when I was too proud to admit I'd chosen the wrong things. Her eyes softened, but she stayed where she was. I don't need an apology, Julian. I need to know who you are now, not the man who left me behind, the man who woke up in this room and started noticing again. He nodded. That man is still figuring himself out, he said, but he knows one thing he wants to try. Amelia's expression shifted, a flicker of something uncertain giving way to cautious warmth. You don't get to rewrite everything, she said gently, but you might get to write something new. I'd like that with you. She didn't move for a moment. Then slowly she stepped forward and sat in the chair beside his bed. Her hands rested in her lap, close enough for him to see the faint tan lines from gloves and sun, the evidence of a life lived on her own terms. He reached out, not touching, just offering. Her fingers brushed his, not quite a promise, but not a rejection either. Julian, she said softly, I'm not a woman waiting to be chosen anymore. I know, he whispered, that's why I'm choosing to meet you where you are. They sat in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full of beginnings. That evening, when the nurse came to check vitals, she found them talking quietly, side by side, two people no longer trying to rewrite the past, but quietly sketching the outline of something possible. Something that might just become love again. Julian's discharge papers were ready by morning. The hospital smelled like coffee and sanitizer, the murmur of shift changes echoing through the halls as nurses moved from patient to patient, pulling back curtains, checking charts, offering quiet comfort in the kind of way most people never noticed. Julian had noticed, not just because he was a patient, but because he had started to see things differently. Slower. He dressed in silence, folding the hospital gown and placing it on the chair beside the bed. The clothes Darren had dropped off, dark jeans, a clean button-up, felt unfamiliar on his skin, too structured after days wrapped in cotton and gauze. He moved carefully, not because of pain, but because he didn't want to rush the stillness. Amelia didn't come to say goodbye. He didn't expect her to. They had spoken in pieces, and not all wounds stitched themselves up neatly. He had to earn whatever came next. The town car outside idled at the curb, sent by someone on his executive team who still didn't know how to take no for an answer. The driver offered to carry his bag, but Julian shook his head and walked to the curb alone, one hand pressed lightly to his ribs. He climbed in, sank into the leather seat, and watched as the hospital slid out of view. He didn't go home. Instead, he gave the driver an address across town, residential, older houses with uneven porches and wind chimes that moved gently in the early spring breeze. He wasn't sure what he would say when he got there, only that he needed to say something. Amelia's house had ivy crawling up one side and a small ceramic dog bowl near the steps. A faded blue bike leaned against the railing, its tires caked in last week's rain. It was the kind of house you built a life in, not a life you escaped from. He stood at the gate for a moment, then walked up and knocked. No answer. Then, just as he was turning to leave, the door opened. Amelia stood there in a soft gray sweatshirt, hair damp from a recent shower, a coffee mug cradled in her hand. She looked surprised but not startled, and behind her a golden retriever mix padded into view, tail wagging cautiously. "You shouldn't be walking this much," she said, setting the mug down. "You just got out." "I needed to see you." The dog sniffed his shoes, decided he wasn't a threat, and settled at her feet. "You tracked down my address?" she asked. "Number Darren told me," he hesitated. "I hope that's okay." She leaned against the doorframe, studying him. "What do you want, Julian?" "I don't know yet, just more time." "To do what?" "To figure out what this is, to know you now, not just the memory of you." Amelia exhaled slowly. "You can come in," she said, "but only for 10 minutes, I have a shift later." Inside, her home smelled like fresh linen and lemon wood polish. There were books stacked in neat rows along one wall, plants thriving on the windowsills, and a pair of running shoes by the back door. It was full of signs of her, unapologetic, rooted at peace. She sat across from him on a low couch, pulling her legs up beneath her. He didn't touch anything, didn't lean forward, just sat and let the quiet settle. "I've been thinking," he said, "about all the things I never asked when we were together. I always assumed I knew you." "You didn't," she said gently. "I didn't," he agreed. Amelia tilted her head. "What do you want to know now?" He looked at her not with guilt, but with the kind of curiosity that asked to be let in rather than to own. "What brings you peace?" She blinked, startled. "What?" "It's something I never asked. I always wanted to fix things, to solve problems, but I never asked what actually made you feel okay in the world." Amelia's lips parted, then closed. She thought for a long moment. Sunlight through the kitchen window in the morning, the smell of lavender and mint when I clip herbs in the garden, a good song on the radio at the end of a hard shift, sleeping with the window open when it's raining. Julian listened like each word mattered. "And you?" she asked after a beat. He smiled, slow and quiet. "Until recently, I wouldn't have known how to answer that, but now, sitting here, listening, not being needed for anything except presence." She looked at him differently then, not with longing, not yet, but with recognition. The dog rested its chin on her knee, and she absently stroked behind its ears. "I don't know what this is either, Julian," she said. "I spent a long time putting myself back together, and you're still in pieces. I know, but I want to rebuild slowly, with honesty this time. I don't expect anything from you." He stood carefully, the 10 minutes nearly passed. "I just wanted you to know that I'm not going to disappear again. If you want to see me, if you want to talk, I'll be there." Amelia stood too, arms crossed loosely, thoughtful. I'm not promising anything, she said. He nodded. I'm not asking for a promise, just a door left open. She walked him to the porch. The breeze lifted her hair as he turned to go. Before he stepped off the last stair, she called after him. Julian. He looked back. Tomorrow's my day off. I take the dog to the park. If you're there, we'll walk. If not, that's okay too. He smiled, something warm blooming in his chest. I'll be there. She didn't smile back, but her eyes said everything. As he walked down the street, each step steadier than the last, he realized it wasn't about fixing what had been lost. It was about showing up for what might still be waiting. And maybe, for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. The park was quiet when Julian arrived the next morning, mist still clinging to the grass like a veil not ready to lift. Sparrows flitted between branches, their wings catching light as the sun edged over the trees. The air was cool, the kind that carried a promise of change, of stillness, of something about to begin. He didn't sit, he stood at the edge of the path, hands in his pockets, watching the trail bend around a grove of maples. He hadn't been to a park in years, not for leisure, not without his phone vibrating in his jacket or an assistant tracking his time. There was no boardroom here, no strategy to hide behind, only breath and morning and the steady rhythm of waiting. Then he saw her. Amelia came through the trees wearing jeans and an olive-green coat, her hair pulled back loosely. Her dog tugged at the leash, trotting ahead with a joy that made Julian smile without meaning to. She noticed him before he raised his hand. Her steps didn't falter, but her expression softened with something almost shy. You came, she said, stopping in front of him. I said I would. She reached down to unclip the dog's leash, letting it bound toward a patch of grass. Julian watched the way her eyes followed the animal, calm, observant, amused. She still moved like she was listening to something deeper than words. They began walking without saying more. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as they settled into a quiet rhythm, not rushed. The kind of silence that only people with shared history could inhabit without unease. Around them, the park slowly filled with life, joggers, parents with strollers, kids tossing frisbees, but in their small stretch of path, the world remained still. Julian was the one to speak first. I resigned yesterday. Amelia looked over, brows raised slightly. From Wakefield. He nodded, effective immediately. She blinked, not hiding her surprise. I didn't expect that. I didn't either, until I woke up in that hospital bed, until I realized how much of my life was being lived without me in it. Amelia was quiet for a moment, digesting. What are you going to do? Start smaller. I've been offered a spot on the board of a nonprofit that works with trauma recovery, mostly veterans and emergency responders. I want to learn again, listen, be useful without needing to own everything. She gave a small smile. That sounds more like living. I think it is. They walked a little farther, her shoulder brushing his as the path narrowed. Why are you telling me this? She asked, not unkindly. Because the person I used to be wouldn't have, he said, and because you deserve to know what's changed, what's still changing. Amelia stopped, turning to face him. The breeze caught the edge of her coat. I'm proud of you, she said, not for resigning but for choosing something honest. He met her gaze. I didn't just come back for redemption, Amelia. I came back because I couldn't let the last thing between us be silence. She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, those he remembered well, held a tremble of something open. I didn't think I wanted anything more with you, she said quietly. I had built a life, learned how to stop looking back. I'm not asking you to go back. No, she said, you're asking me to look forward. He nodded. At whatever pace you need. They stood in the sunlight, warmth rising around them. A dog barked in the distance. The wind moved through the trees like breath. I'm not ready to fall in love with you again, Amelia said. Not yet. He smiled, slow and sure. I'm not asking you to, I'm just asking you to let me walk beside you. She studied him and then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. They kept walking. No hands held, no promises made, but with every step the air between them felt easier, lighter. At the far end of the trail, the dog came bounding back toward them, tongue lolling, tail wagging. Julian bent down, ruffled its ears, and the dog leaned into him with an easy trust. You passed the test, Amelia said, a half laugh in her voice. He looked up at her, eyes bright. Which one? The dog and maybe me. They walked on past the swing sets and the pond, the morning slipping toward midday. There would be coffee later, maybe a meal shared, maybe something even quieter than love, but just as necessary companionship. A life built from slow mornings and conversations that didn't need fixing. And perhaps in the soft turning of time, love would find its way back, not as a grand return but as something gentler, chosen. In the quiet of a park, two people who once let go found their way forward. Not perfect, not rushed, but real. And this time they would not disappear.